Hi, Salma from Nordcraft here, and welcome back to the Learn Nordcraft video series. In this lesson, we're going to build an important office productivity assessment survey. You'll set up a multi-step form, add validation for each step, save form data to session storage, and post the form data to an API. You'll learn about adding services, configuring APIs to post data, handling API callbacks, and saving to and reading from session storage. We'll also go over some things we learned in previous lessons, including adding events, using variables to manage application state, and the show hide formula. If you're new to Nordcraft and you haven't watched the previous lessons, I would recommend starting from lesson 0. But if you're up to speed, go to the Learn Nordcraft repository on GitHub and open up lesson 4. The link is in the description. And just like in lesson 3, I've set up a starter project for you so you can get into the lesson content straight away. And we'll start the lesson by cloning this project to our Nordcraft account. Welcome to Learn Nordcraft lesson 4. Okay, first off, I'm going to give you a quick demo of the app we are going to build. This is the Important Office Productivity Assessment Survey, and it has 4 questions. The first question is, how many stand-ups per day is too many? 1 is obviously too many, but I'm going to show you a little demo of the validation here. Please enter a number greater than -1. Okay, so I'm going to add that there. Make that 1. Let's go to step 2. Describe a time when you synergized, circled back, or zoomed in. We are zooming in on Nordcraft right now. In lesson 4 of the Learn Nordcraft video series, this step also has validation on. Did you forget to unmute your microphone during your last meeting? Here's a demo of the validation. Yes, of course I did. And let's go to step 4. How do you look busy? Emoji react to all team messages, accept all meeting invitations, or send pointless emails to your manager. I like to send pointless emails to Andreas. Let's submit the answers. And we have a success message. Thank you for completing the form. Your productivity will be assessed accordingly. We can also start over so the form gets reset. And I'm going to show you a demo of how we are saving to session storage as well, so that when you refresh this page, if you have completed some of the form, your answers will be preserved. To start the lesson, we're going to head over to the Learn Nordcraft repository on GitHub, find the lesson 4 README, and we're going to clone the starter project to our account. This is a screenshot of the starter project. You can see all of the error messages. You can see the success message already, because we're going to work on showing and hiding those things as we build the app. So we click on the starter project link. And let's hover over this down here and click Clone this app. And we have been launched right into the Nordcraft editor with this dialog giving us this big yellow button. And we're going to click that to clone the project to our account. We're going to choose the organization that we want to clone this project into. And I want this to be public. Click Create Project. The project is now cloned to your account. Just as we did in previous lessons, we're going to go back to the project page. And just as before, so we can keep track of our apps and we don't have a bajillion apps named untitled, we're going to click Edit Details. And we're going to just call this the Productivity Survey. And let's click Update. And let's go to the Start branch that has been created for us. Click Edit. And we're ready to go. Okay, just as in lesson 3, I'm going to scroll right down to the bottom, and for now I'm going to delete this built-in Nordcraft component so it doesn't keep flashing on the screen for us. And first of all, I'll go through the HTML element tree structure so you know what you're working with. We have the H1, which is the title of the page. We have an H2 here, which we're going to show the step number dynamically, 1, 2, 3, or 4. We have an H2 here, which is the form success message. We're going to show that on an API success callback. We have a form error here, which we will also show on an API callback on the error callback. And we have a form element here. We've got little sections here separated in a div. This step one class here, that doesn't really do anything, but it's just really useful sometimes to add those classes that show in the HTML element tree so you know what element kind of section you're looking at. We have the error here for step one, which we will show if step one is invalid. We have a label with the question in and its associated input. If you press A to go to the attributes tab, I've set up a few attributes for you already to make sure the form is accessible. We have the ID, we have the name here, we have a placeholder, and the label here has the for attribute that gives you the ID of that input there. So all of these labels and inputs are already connected for you. We have a button here, go to step two. This will advance the step after step one. Next, we've got the step two section. We've got the step two error, we've got a label, and this time a text area rather than an input, and the go to step three button. We've got the step three area. This one has the step three error. We have a field set here with a group of radio buttons and the legend and the go to step four button. Finally, the step four area with the step four error. And this one uses a select drop down with three configured options for you, including the default option, which is just select one. We have the submit button once we get to step four, and we also have a start over button, which will clear the form data so you can start all over again. The first thing we're going to do is deal with hiding and showing the form success and form error messages. These will be shown and hidden based on the response from the API when we submit the form data. So let's add some variables to deal with that. With nothing selected in the HTML element tree, you'll see the data panel here. Click plus next to variables. We're going to name this first variable form error, and the initial value is going to be false. We'll create a second variable called form success, and the initial value is going to be false. Click on the H2 form success message, and we're going to go over to the attributes panel, press A if it's not visible, and click on the FX button next to show. We're going to select form success from the variables list. And so this form success message will show if form success is true. Right now it's false, so it will be hidden when we click off it. Next, click on the error component below. We know this is a component because it has the 4 pink diamonds, and head over to the attributes panel and again to the FX button next to show. And we're going to show this if there is a form error. So we'll just select form error from the variables list, and that form error will show if form error is true. If we click off that and click off that HTML element, we will not see that form error either. Next, we're going to add 4 variables that we're going to bind to the form input fields to control the state of the application, the state of the form. So let's first add the variable for how many stand-ups per day is too many. So click on the plus button next to variables. We're going to call this one stand-ups, and the initial value is going to be null. We've got a warning here because we're not using it yet, but we'll take care of that in a moment. The next variable for question 2 is describe a time when you synergized, circled back, or zoomed in. We're going to create a new variable, and we're going to call this one describe underscore a underscore time. And the initial value for this one is going to be an empty string. So we can just use 2 quotation marks there. The next variable is for question 3 about whether you forgot to unmute your microphone or not. So we'll click plus next to variables. This one is forgot underscore to forgot unmute, and the initial value is null. And the final variable is how you look busy. So this one is going to be look underscore busy, and the initial value is going to be null. Next, we're going to work on binding those variables we set up to their associated form fields so that when a user edits those form fields, selects different values, the variables will automatically update as well in real time. Nordcraft has a bind to variable shortcut feature, which we can definitely do for some types of inputs. Other types of inputs are a little more complex, but we can definitely do that for the number input on step 1. So scroll down and find the first input in step 1, and let's select that. And we're going to select the attributes tab with A. You'll see at the top here, there is a bind to variable drop down. So we can click that and we can select stand-ups. That's going to automatically power this value and make the FX button blue. If we click on that FX button, we can see that the stand-ups value is null because that's our initial value, and that has been bound. We also have an event that has been added automatically with that binding. If we click on the Events tab or press E, we already have this event, this input event, that on change of that field will set the stand-ups to that value. If we click on this FX button here, we'll see that event.target.value is set to stand-ups. So I can demo this to you now. If we go into test mode, if we add 2 here, and we go out of test mode, we'll see on stand-ups, we go back to variables, that the current value is 2. So that bind to variable shortcut automatically adds the event and binds the value of this input field to the value of the variable you set up. We can also use that same binding shortcut for question 2 on the text area. So click on the text area in step 2, go to the Attributes tab, press A, and let's bind this to describe a time. And you'll see here on this value field here, we've got the FX button highlighted in blue. Describe a time is now the output in that field. Press E to go to events, and we have the input value here that is bound now to describe a time. For step 3, given we're using radio buttons, it's a little more difficult to use that bind to variable shortcut. So we're going to set up those radio buttons with our variables that we set up manually. So click on the first input in that radio group and let's press A for the Attributes tab. And we're going to first have a look at this checked attribute here. We want this radio button to be checked when the value of forgot to unmute is yes. So let's click on this FX button here. And let's take forgot to unmute and let's add the equals formula, and we want it to equal yes. And right now it's going to be false because the initial value for forgot to unmute is null. We're going to do that same thing on the next input. We're going to go to the Attributes tab, press A if it's not visible, click on the FX button next to checked. We're going to get forgot to unmute, and this one is going to be if it equals no. Next, we're going to manually bind the forgot to unmute variable on change of this radio button group. So we're going to click on the first radio button. I'm going to go to the Events tab, press E, and we're going to find down here the input section. And this is going to be input. We're going to select input. So when this input is changed, what we're going to do, click the plus button. We're going to set forgot to unmute. We're going to click the FX button next to value and select event target value. And we have the value already specified on that input. If we go back to the Attributes tab, the value of that input is yes. So the event target value will be yes. When that is clicked, it will set the value of the forgot to unmute variable to yes. We're going to do the same thing for the next radio button. Click on the HTML element there, click E for events, find the input event. We're going to add here set forgot to unmute. Again, click the FX button, event target value. Next, we're going to deal with the selected state of the options inside the select dropdown for step 4. So the first option is selected by default because that's the one that's going to show when this page loads, which is select 1. It is disabled, so you can't select it and submit the form with that. And the next one is going to be selected if the value of how do you look busy is equal to this first value here. So this one is emoji react to all team messages. I'm just going to copy this value here, and on the Attributes tab, going to go into the selected attribute and click the FX button. We want this selected attribute to be true if look busy equals the value of that attribute that we just copied, which is emoji react to all team messages. We're going to do the same thing for the next 2 options. Click on the second one, copy the value in the Attributes tab, go down to the selected FX button, and this is look busy equals that value we just copied. And we'll do the same for the third one. Copy, send pointless emails to your manager. Click on the FX button next to selected. Select look busy, the equals formula, and that value we just copied. Next, we're going to bind that variable using a change event on the select HTML element. So click the select element and press E for the events tab. We're going to find the input group here and we're going to choose change. So when the select group gets changed, what we want to do is set look busy to event target value. We've already tested the first question, but let's quickly test the second two. So if I add test into the step 2 text area in test mode, go back out of test mode, find the variables area, and you'll see that describe a time has been set to test. Go back into test mode, scroll a bit down. Let's click yes on forgot to unmute, and let's select emoji react to all team messages. Let's go out of test mode. Forgot to unmute is now yes, and look busy is now emoji react to team messages. So all of these variables now have been bound to change events on those inputs. Now, it's all well and good having these variables bound to the application state, but if you refresh this page as you're filling out the form, the variables will be reset to their initial value. What's really great for user experience is that if you save the form state in session storage in the browser, so that if someone, for example, accidentally refreshes the page whilst they're filling out the form, you can work it so that their form state gets preserved and they don't need to fill it out again. We're going to use session storage for that, and we are going to set a session storage value on change of each input, and then we're going to get that session storage value, if it exists, as the initial value for each variable. So the first thing we're going to do is save to session storage when the value is changed. If you click on the first input in step 1 and press E for the events tab, and let's go back to that input change event that we set up earlier. We're going to add another node to this event. This is going to be save to session storage. The key is going to be stand-ups, and the value, we're going to use the FX button to get the event target value. And that is going to save that to session storage. And now what we need to do is get the initial value of stand-ups from that session storage value if it exists. So deselect any element and go back to the stand-ups variable that we set up before and click on the FX button next to initial value. Click on the green calculator and we're going to find the formula get from session storage. And the key that we set up just now was stand-ups, stand_ups. Now, if that doesn't exist, we want to default to the initial value we set up earlier, which is null. So we're going to click on the right plus button and we're going to get the default to formula. And we want that to be null. So we'll remove that default value there and we'll make sure to set the type of this to null. So right now, the value in session storage is null, which is correct. We haven't saved it. And the default value that we want, in case it doesn't exist, is null. So let's just demo that for step 1 on the preview page. Okay, so let's say 2 stand-ups per day is too many. Now, to prove this is being saved to session storage in your browser, you can open the DevTools. You can go to the Application tab, go down to Session Storage and click on the URL of your app. You'll notice here that we have a key here, stand-ups with a value of 2. As soon as I change this in the UI, that value gets automatically updated because we set that event to update and save to session storage every time that variable was changed. Next, we're going to save step 2 to session storage and then get that initial value from the session storage if it exists. If we click on the text area, press E for the Events tab, and again select the input event, add another node, save to session storage, and this one is describe a time, that's the key, and the value again is event target value. If we go back to the describe a time variable and click the FX button next to initial value, we're going to get from session storage, describe a time. I'm going to default to, this one is an empty string. If we go back to the preview tab again, let's add a test value into that text area. Let's open up the dev tools, go back to the application tab. You'll see we've got describe a time. If we also change this input here, you'll notice we've got both values saved to session storage. We've got 3 and test value. If we refresh this page, these values will be pre-populated as the initial values as we're getting them from session storage. There we go, refreshing the page, and they're still there. Let's test a new one, test again value. We'll refresh the page, and we've got test again value. So they're being saved to session storage on change, and on page load, we're getting those values from session storage. Let's do the same for step 3. Click on the Yes Radio button here, and let's press E for the Events tab. Go to the Input event. Let's add a new node, save to session storage. This one is forgot to unmute, and the value again is event target value. Let's go down to the next input as well. Press E for the Events tab. Go to the Input event. Let's add another save to session storage. The key here again is forgot to unmute, and the value is event target value. Back on the variables panel here, let's click on forgot to unmute, and let's press the FX button next to initial value. Let's get from session storage, forgot to unmute. Let's default to null. And finally, let's do that for step 4. On the select HTML element, go over to the events tab, press E again and find the change event. Let's add another node, save to session storage. The key here is look busy, and the value is event target value. And on the initial variable value for look busy, let's find the variable here. Let's click here. Let's click the FX button next to initial value. Let's again get from session storage, look busy, and let's default to null. And just to demo that all again on the front end, let's say we do one stand up. Let's put test in the text area. Let's choose yes, and let's choose emoji react to all team messages. When we go and look in the dev tools, we've got all of our session storage values set up. We can refresh the page. Session storage is still there, and the form is still filled in. Next, we're going to deal with the multi-step functionality part of the form. Another good UX tip for forms is to not show too much to the user all at once so they don't get overwhelmed. So we're going to show one question at a time. And for this, we need a step variable. So let's add a new variable called step, and the initial value is going to be 1. We're going to use that step value in this H2 here and show step 1, 2, 3, or 4, depending on the step number. So let's go to this text node here, and let's first of all, let's delete step. And let's go to the FX button here. We're going to find the concatenate formula. We're very familiar with that so far. And that is going to have 2 fields in it. We're going to start with step and a space, and the second field is going to be the step. So right now we've got step 1 showing, and when we increment that step, that text node will change accordingly. And now we're going to show and hide each step section based on the step number. So let's go to step 1. Let's click on that div there inside the form and press A for the Attributes tab. And we're going to click on FX next to Show. And we only want to show this part of the form if the step number is 1. So we're going to choose the equals formula, and we're going to add step into the first field. And in the second field, we're going to add 1. So right now we've got step 1. That's the initial value. And so this is evaluating to true. We're going to scroll down to the step 2 section, go back to the Attributes tab, and we're going to show here with the FX button if the step equals 2. Step in the first field, second, 2, and this is going to evaluate to false. So when we click off this, that step section is going to be hidden. Let's scroll down to step 3 and do the same thing. A for the attributes tab, over to the FX button next to show. Let's find the equals formula. If step equals 3, that one's false now as well. Scroll down to step 4. On the attributes tab, click the show FX button, find the equals formula, and choose step equals 4. So now our app is reflecting that we're on step 1 and we don't see any of the other steps. Next, we want a way to move through the steps by incrementing the step number each time we click one of these green buttons. But we only want to do that if there is no error on the form or on that particular step. So we're going to set up a variable to determine whether there is an error on the form or not. And then we're going to make 4 formulas that validate each single step. So first, let's add a new variable and let's call it step_error. And the initial value for this is going to be false. Next, we're going to create the formulas to validate each step, and they're all going to be slightly different. Find the formulas section on the right panel and let's click the plus button to create a new one. We're going to call this formula step_1_valid, and it's going to take an input. And the name of this input, so we can be clear, is stand-ups. Let's have a test value right now of 1. Now the number of stand-ups is valid if it is greater than -1 and not null. So we're going to set up an AND operator here. Let's turn this into an AND. So the first one, we're going to take the stand-ups input and we're going to find the greater or equal formula, and we're going to add 0 into the second field. The next one, we just want to check if stand-ups does not equal null. So we're going to take the stand-ups input. We're going to find the not equal formula. And here in the second field, we're going to choose null. Currently, the test value for stand-ups is 1. So this is going to evaluate to true, that step 1 is valid. If we change this to null, for example, the output is going to be false. So it's not valid. If we set it to -1, the output will also be false as it's not valid. So we know our formula works. Next, let's add a formula to validate step 2. Click on the plus button next to formulas. Let's call this formula step 2 valid. The input variable name is going to be describe a time just to match the variable. And let's just give it a test value of test. We just want to make sure in this text area that someone has typed something. So we're just going to check if what is in that text area is greater than 0 characters. So click on the green calculator to get the describe a time input. And let's get the size of that string, the length of the string. And let's choose the greater than formula just to make sure it's greater than 0. If we change the test value to nothing, you'll see that the output is evaluated to false, which means that step is not valid. And then it's valid if we just type anything into that test value. So that validation formula works. Next, let's add a formula to validate step 3. Click on the plus button next to formulas, and let's name this one step 3 valid. The input name on this one is going to be forgot to unmute, again to match the variable. And let's just have a test value here of yes. Now this answer is valid if the answer equals yes or no. And so we're going to use an or operator here. And we're going to add whether it's yes in the top one or no in the bottom one. So let's choose forgot to unmute here. The input. Let's find the equals formula here. And let's add yes into the second field. So it's valid if the value of forgot to unmute equals yes. In the second one, we're going to get forgot to unmute. And this is going to be if it equals no. So as my test value is yes, the output is true. If we change the test value to no, the output is true. If we change the test value to anything else, the output is false. So we know that this formula works to validate step 3. Finally, let's add a validation formula for step 4. Let's click the plus button next to formulas, and this one's going to be called step 4 valid. The input variable name is going to be called look busy, and let's just put a test input there. This validation formula is a little bit arbitrary. We could check if the value of look busy equals one of the three options, but in this validation formula, I'm just going to check if it's not empty. So we're going to get the input, the look busy. We're going to get the size of it again, just as in step 2. And we're going to choose greater than 0. Next, we're going to add click events to each of the buttons to validate the step that we're on, and then advance to the next step if it's valid, or set the step error to true if it's not valid. So let's find the first step increment button. That is the one that has the text to go to step 2. Let's click on that button element, press E for the events tab, and let's find the click event here. We're going to add a switch case to this click event. So in the first if, we're going to press the FX button, and this is going to be if step 1 is valid. So we're going to click on the plus button next to output. We're going to find the step 1 valid formula, and the input for this formula is going to be stand-ups. So if this formula evaluates to true with the stand-ups variable input, the output will be true and step 1 will be valid. And if step 1 is not valid, if stand-ups is null or -1 or below, then this will evaluate to false and the else case will run. So if step 1 is not valid, what we want to do is set the step error to true and nothing else. We don't want to advance the steps if there's an error on that step. If step 1 is valid, we want to set the step error to false, just in case it had been set to true previously. And then we want to increment the step count. So we can set step here, and on the FX button here, we can find the step variable and we can add 1. Now to just test this step fully, we're going to go to the error component inside this step 1 area. And we're only going to show this if there is a step error. So press A for the attributes tab. And let's go to the show FX button here. And we're going to show this if there's a step error. So right now there's no step error and it goes away. We can test this full step functionality by going into test mode. Let's first of all change this to -1 and let's try to go to step 2. We'll see the step error. Now let's change this to a valid value, 1, and let's click go to step 2. And now we see step 2. We haven't shown and hidden this error yet, but now we're ready to add functionality to the next 3 steps in the very same way. So let's find the go to step 3 button inside the step 2 area. Let's click on that button, press E for the events tab, and let's choose a click event. Again, let's choose a switch case. And the first if is going to be if step 2 is valid. We're going to find the step 2 formula, step 2 valid formula. We're going to input describe a time, the variable. And if that is valid, we're going to set the step error to false. And we're going to increment the step. So we're going to set step, choose the FX button. This is going to be the step variable add 1. And on this else, we're going to set the step error to true. Now let's move on to step 3. Let's find the button that says go to step 4. Let's go to the events tab. Let's choose a click event. Let's add a switch. On the if, this is going to be if step 3 is valid. We're going to find the step 3 valid formula. We're going to input the forgot to unmute variable. If step 3 is valid, we're going to set step error to false. And then we're going to set the step. We're going to add 1 again. Step, add 1. And if step 3 is not valid, we're going to set step error to true. Next, in step 4, let's find the button that says submit answers. Let's click on that. Let's go to the events tab and let's find a click event. Let's add a switch again. And this one is going to be if step 4 is valid. We're going to find the step 4 valid formula. We're going to input the look busy variable. And again, we're going to set the step error to false. And on the else, we're going to set the step error to true. And here is where we're going to call the API if we've managed to get through all the steps and all of the steps have been valid. Let's just go back through steps 2, 3, and 4 to deal with showing and hiding those error components. So find the error component in step 2. Let's press A for the attributes tab and go to show. We only want to show it if step error is true. Let's close that up and go down to the error component in step 3. Let's do the same thing. Show step error. And again, in step 4 area, error component, show if there's a step error. Before we go and wire up the API and add a service, I just want to add some functionality to this pink Start Over button, as it actually helps with testing when you're testing out the app. This Start Over button is going to reset all the variables back to their initial values, put the step number back to 1, and also clear the session storage. Select the Start Over button and press E for the Events tab, and we're going to add a click event. We're first of all going to set the step back to 1, and we can do that manually. We don't need a formula for that. And then we're going to set the stand-ups to null. And then we're going to set describe a time to an empty string. Then we're going to set forgot to unmute to null. And then we're going to set look busy also to null. And finally, to make sure that we don't have any of those values saved in the session storage anymore, we're going to call clear session storage. And there we go. That's our Start Over button. We can now test that flow by going through the steps, going through the validation, and then clicking that Start Over button to reset the form back to default. So here we are. Let's choose -1 to get an invalid result. Let's try to go to step 2. We can't. Let's choose a valid result and let's go to step 2. Let's try and go to step 3 now. We see the error message. Let's just add that in to go to step 3. Let's try and go to step 4 without choosing a value. There we go. We couldn't do that. Let's choose no. Let's go to step 4. Let's try and submit. We get an error. Let's select one. Nothing happens on submit yet. Now let's press Start Over to go to step 1 again. And I've actually noticed that we haven't added resetting in the step error to that Start Over button. So let's go back to the app and add that in now. Back on the Start Over button, we're going to go back to the event, press E on here. We're going to add another node just above clear session storage, and we're going to set step error to false. Finally, we are ready to post our form data to an API to store it into a database. And for that, we're going to be using Supabase and the Supabase service provided in Nordcraft. Now, you can choose to create your own Supabase account and your own Supabase database for this, and the instructions for doing this are on the Learn Nordcraft repository on lesson 4. There are some instructions about what to potentially name your database, what type of row level security policy you need, and then the columns you need in your database and the types. However, if you want to get started with this next part of the lesson really quickly, I've provided a pre-built database for you that's owned by Nordcraft that you can test posting your data to. Now, you won't be able to see your data in a database, but you will be able to get a success or error callback from the API when you post it. And we're going to use these credentials down here to set up our Supabase service. So to save a bit of time before we go back to the Nordcraft editor, let's copy this project URL and let's add our Supabase service. Back in the editor, you're going to go to the project sidebar by clicking on the files icon and find the services area. And here, click the plus button to create a new service. Click on Supabase at the top here. Let's just call it Supabase. And in the project URL field, paste that value you just copied from the GitHub repository. Now we're going to go back over to GitHub and copy the anon public key provided. Find the anon public key, click to copy, and in the anon public key field, let's paste that in. You'll see here now that it says connection established. This means you have access to posting to this database without needing to set up anything else manually. Click the tick button to save your service details. Now find the API area with no HTML elements selected, and let's click the plus button. And because we've added a service, we have all these predefined endpoints to post or delete or patch or get from without having to add all of those manually. So that's what's really great about services. What we're going to do is we're going to post to /survey_results. So let's select that. What has been pre-populated for you are the headers here. This is the API key, which we pasted in as the anon public key. The content type of the post request has been pre-filled for you, and so has the URL. And what we need to do is configure the body that we send with the post request, which is going to be an object made up of all our state variables. So let's click on the body tab here. And let's click on the FX button here next to body. Now this has already as well been kind of pre-filled for you because we know that we've got stand up, describer time, forgot to unmute, and look busy in the database schema itself. We don't want to send the ID through. We're going to auto increment that. And we also don't want to send created at. But we are just going to populate the values for each of these next 4 keys using the values of the state variables. So the value for stand-ups is going to be stand-ups. The value for describer time is going to be describer time. The value for forgot to unmute is forgot to unmute. And the value for look busy is look busy. And that's our body setup for the post request. Next, it's time to set the click event on the Submit Answers button to actually call this API. Let's find the Submit Answers button, press E for the Events tab, and find the click event that we set up before. So if step 4 is valid, we're going to add another node here, and we're going to call survey results. Now, because we already set up the body for that API post request from all of the state variables, we don't need to set up anything here. All we need to do is configure the onSuccess and onError callbacks for this API and respond in the UI accordingly. So let's first click on the onSuccess callback. And we're going to set the form success to true, which is one of the first variables we set up before. On the onError callback, we're going to set the form success to false. Hello, VoiceOver Salma here. What I meant to say at this point was that on the error API callback, you'll want to set form error to true. You might also want to add some extra functionality to the Start Over button on click by resetting the form success and form error variables. Additionally, you could create a Start Over workflow and also call that workflow on success of the API call. Done, and that's all we need to do to post our data to the API. So let's give this a try now on the preview page. So let's choose one stand up. Let's just choose test for this value. Let's choose yes for step 3, and let's just choose a random one, and let's submit our answers. And there we go. We have, thank you for completing the form. Your productivity will be assessed accordingly. And now let's go and check that that has been saved to the database. So here we are, we're in Supabase, and we can already see 2 entries in this table. We have the first form that I completed at the start of the lesson, and then we have the second form that I just submitted with this test value here. And clearly, I always like to look busy sending pointless emails to my manager because that's the one I tend to choose. On this error callback as well, you can choose to do things like reset the form, clear the session storage, or provide any other further instructions to the user. But I didn't want to be too prescriptive about that because it didn't really matter for this lesson. But that's it. That is your multi-step form built. You're posting the data collected to an API. You're saving it in session storage to improve the UX if somebody accidentally refreshes the page. And now you're ready to deploy it. So if you click on View Changes, you can add a commit message here to publish your project. You can see that you've changed the homepage and you've added a Supabase service. And there you go. That was lesson 4. And that's it. You completed lesson 4. You created a multi-step form. You saved to and read from session storage. You included validation for each step, and you collected all of that data together to post the form data to a Supabase service. Keep an eye out for more Learn Nordcraft lessons in this series, and I'll see you very soon.